A salt-stained dock in Joppa. The morning is gray. The boat is unloading the way every boat has unloaded in this harbor for 1,000 years. And a weather-burned man steps onto the planks with nothing but a walking staff, a worn cloak, and a story he cannot stop telling. He does not look like a king. He does not look like a general. He does not look like a philosopher with a school of students behind him. He looks like what he is, a fisherman from a backwater province, a man who 2 years earlier would not have been allowed to speak in the temple courts of the city he just left. But he is telling everyone who will listen that he watched a man die, watched the spear go in, watched the blood pour out, and then watched that same man eat fish in front of him on a beach 40 days later. He is going to die for that story. He does not know it yet. None of them know it yet. There are 11 other men like him, scattered. One is walking east toward Persia. One is on a ship bound for Greece. One is going to walk farther than any of them, all the way to the southern coast of India, where the spice ships dock and the language is not even close to anything he has ever heard. They are not staying. They are not building a headquarters. They are not writing a doctrine. They are going to the ends of the earth, and within 70 years, 10 of them will be dead, most of them violently, by the cross, by the sword, by the spear, by the club, by the knife of a man trained to skin a body while it was still alive. One of them will not die, not for almost a century. He will be a boy when he meets Jesus, and an old man when he meets him again on a black, volcanic rock in the middle of the Aegean Sea, where Rome sends its enemies to disappear. We will get to that old man, but not yet. Here is what you need to understand before any of this makes sense. The Greek word the New Testament uses for these men is martes. It just means witness, someone who saw a thing and is telling you about it. But within one generation of Joppa, that word had to be redefined, because so many of the witnesses were being killed for what they had witnessed. That is how we got the English word martyr. This is not a story about religion. This is not a story about church tradition. This is not a story about a list of names you memorized in Sunday school. This is a story about 12 men who saw something so real they refused to take it back, even when refusing cost them their skin, their heads, and their lungs. By the end of this video, you will know exactly where each of them died, how each of them died, and what the historical record actually says, not just the Bible, but the Roman historians, the Jewish historians, the church fathers who lived close enough to the events to have known the eyewitnesses' grandchildren. 12 men, 12 deaths, 1 refusal. Let's begin. Here's what most people miss. The Bible only records 2 of the 12 deaths. 2. Out of all of them, only 2 are written down in the New Testament itself. The other 10 you have to dig for. They live in dusty Greek manuscripts in the writings of Roman historians, in the records of church fathers who lived 3 or 4 generations after Joppa. But those first 2, those are in your Bible, and they happen fast. The first one to fall is James, not the one you might be thinking of. There are 2 James in the 12, and the early church had to invent nicknames just to keep them straight. The one who dies first is the greater. James, son of Zebedee, brother of John, a Galilean fisherman like Peter, like Andrew, salty hands, sunburned neck, the kind of man who probably did not own a second pair of sandals in his life. You can find him in the 12th chapter of Acts, 3 verses. That is all the airtime he gets. It is around the year 44, 12 years after the crucifixion. Herod Agrippa, the grandson of the same Herod who tried to murder Jesus as a baby, has decided that this Jesus movement is getting too loud. He arrests James. He has him beheaded, just like that. The first apostle is dead before the second decade of the church is over. But Eusebius, the early church historian, who had access to documents that no longer exist, adds something you will not find in your Bible. The soldier who arrested James was so moved by the way James testified at his trial that the soldier converted on the spot and was beheaded with him, side by side, 2 heads on the same morning. One, an apostle. One, a Roman who had been sent to kill apostles and had spent maybe an hour as a Christian before he died for it. That is the first of them, and the violence has already started. Stay with me for the second one, because the second death in the Bible is the one that does not fit the pattern. The second name is Judas Iscariot, the betrayer. You know how this ends. 30 pieces of silver thrown back into the temple. A rope, a field. Acts adds that his body fell and the wound was terrible. Scholars have argued for centuries about how to reconcile the two accounts. The most likely answer is the simplest one. The rope broke after he was already dead. But here is the part that matters for the story we are telling. 11 of them died refusing to take it back. One of them died because he already had. Judas is the contrast. Judas is the dark line that lets you see the brightness of the other 11. He had walked with Jesus for 3 years. He had heard everything they heard. He had seen everything they saw. And when the moment came, he sold it. And he could not live with what he had done. The other 11 were given the same chance. Every single one of them. Every Roman governor who threatened them, every Persian sword pointed at their chest, every Greek crowd shouting at them in the agora. They could have walked it back. A word. Why, 1 word. I lied. That is all it would have taken. None of them said it. After Judas dies, the 11 gather in an upper room. Acts chapter 1. They cast lots, the ancient way of asking God to choose, and they pull a man named Matthias to replace him. Matthias is the forgotten apostle. You will not find him in any famous painting. He has no cathedrals named after him, but the early historians tell us he went north to Colchis on the eastern shore of the Black Sea, modern-day Georgia, a wild place. A place where the Roman armies had not even bothered to fully conquer. He was stoned there, then beheaded. That is 3. 3 apostles dead within 20 years of the empty tomb. 1 by Herod's sword, 1 by his own rope, 1 by stones in a country most people listening to me right now could not find on a map. And the Bible has stopped telling us. From here on, the historians take over. Because from here on, the apostles scatter, and what happens to them is going to depend entirely on which road they take out of Jerusalem. But it gets stranger. Before Jesus left them, he gave them one last command. Acts chapter 1, verse 8. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. The ends of the earth. Not the next town, not the next province, the ends of the earth. And the historians tell us they took it literally. By the time the second generation of Christians is born, the apostles are not in Jerusalem anymore. They are scattered across 3 continents, from the cold rivers of Persia to the spice ports of southern India, from the markets of Ephesus to the dye shops of Hierapolis, from the burning sands of Ethiopia to the volcanic shores of the Black Sea. 12 men, 3 continents, almost no roads, No common language, no money, no protection, and by the time the empire catches up to them, they are dying everywhere at once. Start with Andrew, brother of Peter, the fisherman who, according to John's Gospel, was the very first disciple Jesus ever called. Andrew goes west. He preaches through Scythia, through the Black Sea region, and eventually down into Greece. He ends up in a city called Patras, on the western coast of the Peloponnese. Beautiful country, olive trees, blue water. The local Roman governor is a man named Aegeus, and Aegeus has had enough of Andrew telling Greek women they do not need to sleep with Roman soldiers to get into heaven. So he condemns Andrew to be crucified. But Andrew asks for one thing, not to be bound, so that his death will take longer, so that he will have more time to preach from the cross. He is tied, not nailed, to an X-shaped cross. We know that shape today as the Cross of St. Andrew. It is on the flag of Scotland. It is on the Union Jack of the United Kingdom. The reason that shape exists on those flags is because of what happened to this Galilean fisherman on a hillside in Patras. Hippolytus tells us he preached for 2 days, bound to that cross, while the crowd watched, while Roman soldiers stood guard, until his lungs finally gave out. Now move east a little, to Hierapolis, in what is today central Turkey, a city built on white limestone terraces that look like frozen waterfalls. This is where Philip dies. Philip was from Bethsaida, same town as Peter and Andrew, same Sea of Galilee. He goes to Phrygia, deep into Asia Minor, and the historians tell us he was crucified there. Some traditions say upside down. Others say in the same shape as Andrew. The details vary. The death does not. And here is something most people do not know. In 2011, an Italian archaeological team found a tomb in Hierapolis, built into a hillside. The inscriptions, the architecture, the location, everything matched what the ancient sources said about Philip's burial site. After 2,000 years, a sentence in a Greek manuscript suddenly had a hole in the ground to point to. The historical record is not just a story. Sometimes it has an address. Now go further east, to Armenia, to the high country between 2 seas where the snow stays on the mountains most of the year. This is where Bartholomew dies, the one Jesus once looked at and said, "Here is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Bartholomew is also called Nathanael in the Gospel of John. 2 names, same man. And what is done to him is the most physically horrifying death on this entire list. He is flayed alive, skinned, while still breathing. If you have ever wondered why Michelangelo painted Bartholomew in the Sistine Chapel, holding his own skin in his hand like a wet coat, that is why. The artist knew the tradition. He was telling the world how Bartholomew died in the only language frescoes can speak. After they finish skinning him, they behead him. That is the mercy at the end. And while all of this is happening in the West, one of the 12 has been walking east for thousands of miles, across the Persian highlands, across the Indus River, all the way to the southern tip of India. His name is Thomas, the doubter, the same. Thomas, who in the upper room said, "Unless I see the mark of the nails and put my finger in his side, I will not believe." That same Thomas ends up farther from home than any of the others. Mylapore, the southeast coast of India. He preaches there for years. He builds churches there. He baptizes Hindus there. And around the year 72, he is run through with a spear on a hillside outside the city. There are Christians in Kerala, India today They call themselves the St. Thomas Christians, who can trace their families back through 20 centuries of unbroken Christian tradition to the day Thomas first walked off the dock, a Galilean fisherman, the most famous doubter in Christian history, and he started a church in India that is still alive 2,000 years later. We are halfway through, 7 men down, 5 left, and the 5 remaining include the most famous death in Christian history. Before we get there, if this video is showing you something you have never been taught, take 10 seconds right now and hit subscribe. It is the only way I know to keep telling these stories. We have crossed 3 continents already. We have watched Andrew preach from a cross for 2 days. We have watched Bartholomew lose his skin in the high country of Armenia. We have watched Thomas die with a spear in his side on the other side of the world. But the worst is not behind us. The worst is right here. Before we go on, there is a word you need to hear. The Greek word for cross is stauros. It just means an upright stake. The Romans did not have one shape of crucifixion. They had many. They had the crux imissa, the traditional cross you see in churches. They had the crux decussata, the X shape. Andrew was tied to. They had the crux commissa, a T shape used for slaves. And they had the crux inversa, upside down. They invented variations the way a carpenter invents joints, because the goal was never just death. The goal was a death so slow, so public, and so humiliating that no one watching would ever consider doing what the dying man had done. This is what the apostles walked into, open-eyed, knowing. Matthew goes south, out of Jerusalem down through the Sinai, across the Red Sea into Africa, to Ethiopia. The same Ethiopia where in Acts chapter 8, the treasurer of the queen had already been baptized by Philip. There was a foothold there. Matthew goes to build on it. This is the same Matthew who used to sit at a tax booth in Capernaum, collecting Roman money from his own people. The most hated profession in Judea, a traitor, a collaborator. And when Jesus walked by his booth and said 2 words, "Follow me," Matthew stood up and walked away from everything he had ever owned. He never sat down at that booth again. He dies in Ethiopia. Most of the older sources say by sword. Some say while celebrating communion at an altar. The exact details are uncertain, but the pattern is not. Matthew, the tax collector who became a gospel writer, ends his life on a continent he had to walk to, carrying a message he had not been allowed to share until he met a Galilean carpenter. Now we turn back to Jerusalem, because the second James is still there. James, son of Alphaeus, the one with the lesser nickname, the forgotten James. He stayed close to home. He kept preaching in the city where Jesus had been killed. He was warning the priests and the Sadducees that the man they had crucified was alive. Hegesippus, a Jewish Christian historian, who lived close enough to the events that he probably knew people who knew. James tells us how it ended. They brought James up to the pinnacle of the temple, the southeastern corner, a drop of about 150 feet onto stone. They demanded that he stand there in front of the Passover crowds and renounce Jesus. He did the opposite. He preached from the top of the temple to a crowd of thousands. He told them Jesus was the Son of God, sitting at the right hand of the Father, coming again on the clouds. So they pushed him. He hit the pavement, and he did not die. Eyewitnesses watched a broken man drag himself to his knees, bleeding, spine destroyed, and then they watched him fold his hands and start to pray. For them, the men who had just thrown him off 100-foot wall, and one of them a fuller a man who beat cloth for a living, whose hands were stronger than any other man's. In the trade, picked up his heavy wooden club, and he finished what the fall had started. James, son of Alphaeus, died praying for his killers. The same way Stephen had died 20 years before. The same way Jesus had died 30 years before that. We have 10 now. 10 apostles down. 2 left to talk about. Plus, the one we have been promising. But before we get to the most famous death on this list, there are 2 more we have not addressed. Because the apostles often traveled in pairs, and 2 of them died together. Jude, Thaddeus, the writer of one of the shortest letters in the New Testament, and Simon, the Zealot. Once a member of an underground political movement that wanted to overthrow the Roman Empire with knives, the 2 of them went east, through Mesopotamia, into Persia, modern-day Iran. We do not know the exact city. We do not know the exact day. But the older sources agree on what happened. Jude was killed first, by clubs, or arrows, or both. The details differ. The outcome does not. And then they took Simon, the man who had once carried a hidden dagger to assassinate Roman officials, the man who before he met Jesus had wanted to free Israel by violence, and they sawed him in half. 2 men who in the upper room had argued with each other about who would sit closest to Jesus. 2 men who came from political factions that should have been enemies. 2 men who died side by side under the same Persian sky for the same Galilean carpenter. That is 12, counting Judas who broke, counting Matthias who replaced him. We are at 12. But the story is not over. Because one of them did not die by the sword. One of them did not die by the cross. One of them did not die alone in a foreign prison. He died old, in Ephesus, after watching every brother he ever loved be murdered for the same name. The year is somewhere around 64. The city is Rome. The emperor is Nero, and Nero has a problem. Half of his capital has just burned to the ground in a fire that lasted 6 days and 7 nights. The people of Rome are looking for someone to blame. Nero is looking for someone to give them. He picks the Christians. What follows is the first imperial persecution in history. Christians are sewn into the skins of wild animals and torn apart by dogs in the arena. They are crucified along the Appian Way as roadside warnings. They are coated in pitch, tied to poles in Nero's gardens, and set on fire to light his evening parties. And somewhere in that bloodbath are the last 2 names on our list. Peter is first, the fisherman who started this whole thing, the one who walked off the dock in Joppa with nothing but a staff and a story. He is an old man now, probably in his 60s. His wife is with him in Rome. Yes, Peter was married. The gospel tells you so. When Jesus heals his mother-in-law, and tradition tells us his wife is martyred before he is, he watches her led away to her death. He calls out to her by name one last time as she goes. Then they come for him. The night before his crucifixion, Peter remembers something Jesus said to him on a beach in Galilee 30 years before. The 21st chapter of John, verse 18. When you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. Peter had not understood it then. He understands it now, but Peter has one request for his executioners. He asks not to be crucified the way Jesus was crucified. Origen, the great Christian scholar of the 2nd century, tells us why. Peter said he was not worthy to die in the same posture as his Lord. So they granted his request. They turned the cross over, and they nailed Peter upside down. This is the same man who in a courtyard outside Caiaphas's house had denied even knowing Jesus 3 times before a rooster crowed. The same man who had cursed and sworn that he had never met the carpenter from Nazareth. That man at the end of his life refused to die in the same shape as the man he had denied. Not because he thought he was better, because he thought he was less. That is what 30 years with the risen Jesus does to a coward. Pay attention to this part. They buried Peter on a hill outside the city walls. Centuries later, the Roman Empire would be Christian, and a small chapel would be built over his grave. Centuries after that, the chapel would become a basilica, and the basilica is still there. You can stand on it. They call it St. Peter's. The largest church in the world is built on top of a Galilean fisherman who asked to be hung upside down because he could not bear the honor of dying the same way as his teacher. There is one more name: Paul. Paul was not one of the original 12, but by the time he wrote his last letter, the early church already considered him the 13th apostle. He is in Rome too. Same persecution, same Nero, but Paul is a Roman citizen, and Roman citizens have one legal right that non-citizens do not. They cannot be crucified. Quick, clean, the mercy of citizenship. So they take him outside the city on the Ostian Way, and they give him the sword. 2 letters before he died, Paul wrote one of the most haunting paragraphs in the New Testament. 2 Timothy chapter 4. I am already being poured out as a drink offering. The time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. He knew, he had known for a long time. He walked to the block already in his own words pouring out. That is the 12, plus Matthias, plus Paul, 13 apostles, 13 deaths. But we promised you one more. If you have ever sat in a hospital room and watched the last person who knew you as a child take their final breath, if you have ever been the last one left in a generation, you know something about what John was carrying. He had outlived all of them. The boy who pulled fish next to him in the Galilee gone. The brother he shared a mother with, beheaded under Herod. The friend who refused to be hung right side up, crucified in Rome. He was the last one, the last living human being who had touched Jesus, heard him laugh, watched him eat fish on a beach after he was supposed to be dead. Tertullian tells us they tried to kill John in Rome. They threw him into a vat of boiling oil. He stepped out unhurt, so they exiled him to an island called Patmos, a black volcanic rock in the middle of the Aegean Sea where Rome sent its enemies to disappear. Here's the part nobody tells you. The Greek word for what happened next is apocalypsis. It does not mean disaster. It means an unveiling, a pulling back of a curtain. And there, on that black volcanic rock, the same boy who once leaned his head against Jesus at supper, now 90 years old, and bent with the weight of everyone he had buried, does fall on his face. And the same voice that had said, "Akoluthei moi, follow me to a fishing boat," 70 years before, speaks one more time. Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. John did not die on Patmos. They eventually let him come home. He died of old age in Ephesus around the year 100. The only one of the 12 to die in bed. The only one who saw what he saw before he closed his eyes. So pay attention to this, because we are at the part that matters. There are 3 things to take with you when this video ends. First, the historical record is consistent. Across 6 independent sources spanning 1,500 years, the same pattern holds. Almost all of them died violently. None of them recanted. That is not normal. That is data. Second, people do not die for what they know is a lie. They lie to save themselves. The disciples had every chance to walk it back. A word would have done it. Not one of them said it, which means whatever they saw in that upper room and on those Galilean shores, they actually saw it. Third, the same Jesus who said, "Follow me to a fisherman by a lake," said it again to an old man on a rock. He is still saying it to you right now, and the only question that matters is whether you will say what they said. Yes? And mean it the way they meant it, with your whole life, because that is what follow me has always cost, and that is what it has always been worth. Which one of these 12 hit you the hardest? Was it Peter asking to be turned upside down because he could not bear to die like his Lord? Was it Thomas the doubter dying with a spear in his side in India? Or was it John, the only one who was not allowed to die yet, because heaven had one more thing to show him? Tell me below. I read every comment. 11 of them died refusing to take it back. One of them died peacefully at 90, having outlived every emperor who ever tried to silence the others. People do not die like that for a lie. They die like that for what they actually saw.